Course.
Let's see if, we made it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast today. I have the wonderful Dr. Maria Temple. Welcome, Dr. Anna Maria.
So glad to be here, Abby. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I know you've been here a few times. I think this is our third podcast together. So
Yeah.
I am just so grateful to have you here. And today we are going to talk all about Dupixent and histamine intolerance. So those are big questions that I get really, really often. And first, I'm just going to introduce Dr. Anna Maria. She's a pediatrician. She also has 3 kids. And I know that I can't remember if it was one or a few of your kids had eczema, but I know that you dealt with that and allergies, 2 of them. And I know you also helped them go through and also overcome ADHD. So you have gone through a lot with your kids.
Yes, I have. Did I tell you that my dog had eczema?
Did
I tell you about this?
No.
I was thinking
Recently?
the other day, I was like, I'm not sure. Yeah, when my puppy was like 2 years old, he had these weird blotchy things. He's a Rhodesian Ridgeback and he has like this brown coat and they're known for sensitive skin, of course. And he had these black spots where he lost hair and it was like raised and eczema looking hideous little thingies. And I took him to the vet and they're like steroids and antibiotics. Okay, the first time, fine. The second time, fine. The third time, I'm like, listen, like he keeps getting these weird spots and they were big and it looks like the mange really. And they were like, all right, well, if it keeps happening, we'll do a biopsy and just kind of really dig a little deeper into what's going on. He also happened to get ear infections at the same time that these things would appear. And I'm like, So we walked out of there. And then that's after I had finished one of my children's healing her eczema. And I looked at my husband, I was like, okay, well, I'm not a vet, I'm a pediatrician, but food has been the root cause for the, one child who had eczema at the time. And I was like, what if that's what's going on with a dog? And he's like, you're so weird with your stuff, And I went home and I Googled, and sure enough, the breed has many issues with their skin and they have food allergies. And I concocted my own concoction of dog food with raw meat and like cooked all these vegetables and whatever. And lo and behold, the dog's skin completely resolved. Okay. Fun fact, he became really constipated because I don't know how to make dog food. But once we saw that, we're like, oh my gosh, the common denominator was we removed grains was one of his big issues. So we removed grains out of his diet. He went on a full raw diet by a vet. And then never had another skin issues ever again in the past 5 years. And his ear infections also happened to resolve.
That's amazing.
I totally forgot the story.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I have someone who actually shared about how pets can get topical steroid withdrawal too. And they shared some photos and it looked pretty bad.
I'm sure. I mean, just because, it seems like when I go, they're dogs, they don't go through. No, I think that they have a lot of similar issues. I'm not a vet. I don't pretend to be one, but that's my observation.
Well, your dog is really grateful and just lucky to have you because you chose the alternative route where he didn't have to go through all that suffering.
Yeah, and I'm annoyed. I didn't take pictures because he looked horrible. So I didn't want to take pictures of my ugly looking dog. And now I wish I had, so I was like, look what happened. Because you probably think that it wasn't that big of a deal. It was terrible.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's it's always interesting to learn about how pets can be affected that way too.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right, we are going to talk all about Dupixent and histamine intolerance, both which affect the community a lot. Maybe we can start by sharing about your thoughts about Dupixent because a lot of people have asked about Dupixent. So, yeah, let's start by sharing your thoughts on that.
Sure. So Dupixin has come on the market and was FDA approved for adults in 2017 and approved for children in 2020. And a lot of patients ask me, what are the long-term side effects? And I'm like, we don't have long-term side effects. It hasn't been on the market and used in large population studies, except since 2020. It's kind of like, when we talk about current pandemic and how long is the current vaccine, the antibodies. I'm like, we don't have long-term data. And so we don't have long-term data on Dupixent and what is it going to do. So if our children take this medication regularly, when they're ready to have children, what does that look like? When they become adults, do you develop another? Because it's a potent, what is Dupixent? Dupixent is a potent immunomodulator. And I talk to my patients, I'm like, it is like a cancer therapeutic drug. What are cancer drugs? They're potent immunomodulators. Generally speaking, we're not going into all of them, but generally speaking. So what always concerns me, we're like, well, the immune system is fired up and causing eczema in what we're talking about today. And then we say, oh, this is so horrible and horrific. Let's stomp down the immune system. And I get it. I understand why we're doing that. But the question that we're not asking, why is the immune system on fire? By using Dupixent, we're not answering that question. We're just putting a Band-Aid on a problem. And we don't know how horrible this Band-Aid is going to be. I don't know. For some people, it might be totally fine. But what about for the people that it's not going to be totally fine? And it's a powerful, powerful medication. It's not just kind of a little thing. And when we're dealing with eczema and our children are bleeding and they're scratching all night, and my son, he was older when he developed eczema, and like he woke up and like he was like missing skin off his face. It was like the most horrific thing. So of course you're like, oh my gosh, I need to get this child help like ASAP because he has to go to school like this. So you're looking for, but when we're looking at these kind of medications, we got to really be careful of what is our plan with this. Like, what are we really doing with this? Have we asked the question, why is my child's immune system on fire? And if we've never addressed why the child's immune system is on fire, you really can't go to Dupixent. If you've tried everything, listen, sometimes you've done everything. You've done the gut healing. You've done the dietary changes. You've done the supplements. You've done the detox. You've done mold, anything, you stood on your head, you like tried everything, and there's just no relief in sight. That may be a life-saving solution for some people. So I'm not saying it's never, but in the US, we are way too quick to jump right to a medication like this. That's my whole thing. I say the same thing about ADHD medicines, about all of them. It's not that there's not a purpose for some of these medications for some people. It's just we're using them way too quickly, way too cavalier, for way too many people.
And I've heard of people as young as, kids as young as, I think it was even like age 6 who have been on it. And we don't know what they're going to be like when they're off of it, or even if it is going to continue to help them long term.
Right. And when I look at cancer drugs, I'm like, we know the side effect of cancer drugs is later on getting cancer, because that's just the effect. So I'm like, does this have that? And they're like, no, we don't. I'm like, but it hasn't been on the market long enough. So I don't know that we have that answer. Most medication trials and things we know have been on the market for years. I do not know how long it was in clinical trials before 2017 to say, okay, well, obviously it was not 20 years out. Because we also these days seem to be moving some things through clinical trials a little bit quicker in the interest of making a little extra money. And I know we're trying to do a good thing, but I get a little worried and skeptical of how have we seen all the data? Has all the data been published? Do we truly know all the long-term side effects? I'm becoming quite skeptical these days.
Yep, same here. And I think we talked last week on the Facebook Live about even how topical steroids have been around for 50 years, but only now are we seeing the side effect of topical steroid withdrawal.
100%. 100%. How about the fact that, there's so many things in our environment that we're like, oh, snap. How about Tylenol? Tylenol has been around for, I don't know, decades. And only now are we talking about that Tylenol is a risk factor for developing eczema. We've had Zantac, Pepcid, all these PPI or Prilosec, Nexium, all these medicines on the market for decades. And only now we're like, oh, actually it increases your risk of eczema. Oh, Zantac taken in infancy actually increases your risk for fractures. But we haven't talked, no one really talks about that even now, but it's coming a little bit more to the forefront. And these medicines have been around for decades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is so much more to it. And what I love about you is that you actually look into the root cause to help treat it from the inside out.
Yeah, because when we use Band-Aids, so when we use topical steroids, again, sometimes you need topical steroids. When we use, and say, we're not fixing the problem. So it's going to keep recurring. So then you have your child on Dupixent, and then after 6 months, you're like, okay, well, why does the eczema keep coming back? So does that mean that for the rest of your child's life, we're using Dupixent? Why does it? And that probably was the number one question that frustrated me so much when I was doing traditional medicine. I would prescribe steroids to my patients, yes, even babies, with eczema, and the parents would come back and they're like, why does it keep coming back? And my response was literally, because eczema keeps coming back. That was my answer. And now I'm like, what was I saying? Because I had no idea. Now I'm like, that I understand that there is a deeper cause, that it goes way beyond genetics, because a lot of things that I hear all the time, there's nothing I can do about it because it's genetic. Genetic is not the full answer. Genetic only puts you at 40% risk of eczema. That's still a huge number, but it's not 100%. So what is the rest of the story? And we need to look into it. Otherwise, the problem will keep recurring, or the problem will morph into something else. Like we have discussed before, 75% of kids who have eczema develop seasonal allergies. 75%. And then 50% develop asthma. That's a huge number, and 20% never outgrow eczema. It used to be like, oh, it's just no big deal. Now it's 20% don't. And then out of other kids with eczema, 6% develop ADHD. So if we don't treat the root cause of the eczema, we have all these other things that are coming down the pike. And then unfortunately, in traditional medicine, the way I used to be like, oh, it's coincidence. Oh, it just happens. There's no coincidence. There is a path that has been set forth, and are we paying attention to it? And are we addressing it, what the issues are from the beginning?
Wise words, Dr. Anna Maria. I love how you put it, because I think that's so important, the way you worded it. And I think that brings me on to our next point that we want to talk about, is in regards to not just really working on the root cause to help the skin, but I also want to touch upon the topic of histamine intolerance and how that affects our skin as well.
Sure. Histamines, especially this time of the year when we have everything blooming and it's beautiful, but allergies, so it's a perfect time to talk about histamines. And what happens is that in our bodies, we have these cells are called mast cells, and they look like little piñatas. And inside the piñatas, there's not candy, there's histamines. And when the mast cells explode, the histamines explode. But the mast cells are created by our body to protect us from viruses, bacteria, fungi, mold, pollen, because you don't want to have too much pollen in the body, because that detrimentally affects. So the body protects itself with the mast cells and the histamines inside the mast cells. So we have pollen coming at us, and the mast cells are patrolling. They see the pollen. The piñata explodes, the histamines go everywhere, and now they have to go into specific receptors to cause a specific reaction to get rid of the pollen. So for example, we have histamine 1 receptors in our nose and in our eyes. So when pollen comes in, you start sneezing and your watery eyes and you're itchy and it's all like right here in your face. That's histamine 1 receptor. And the way mast cells protect us is that sneezing in the snot is helping us expel the pollen. So it's a defense mechanism against pollen. However, some people, when we use a pollen example, they have another receptor, H2 receptor, and that is in our guts and in our bellies. And I'll have patients who during pollen season get belly aches, they vomit, they're nauseated. And when they eat certain foods that cross-react with the pollen, they get even more belly sensitive. And then we have histamine number 3 receptor, which is in our brain. Those kids and adults are usually brain fog, tired, headaches, irritable, more ADHD symptoms, more behavioral problems, because the histamines have now attached to the brain receptors and are irritating the system. I can't tell you how that's protective, but that's what happens. And then for histamine number 4, that's located through the rest of our body and our skin. And that's when we have eczema flaring, psoriasis flaring, and other things, because the histamines have exploded. But it's not just pollen. That was just an example. We can have histamines overload because genetically. You can have it, like we said, because of pollen. Stress releases tons of histamines and makes those mast cells explode. Mold exposure, because we said if that's the body's way of trying to protect us. Viral infection, bacterial infection, and even some foods. There's foods that contain histamines, and when we eat them, it causes a triggering effect of histamines, to name a few things. And of course, don't forget medications. You could be taking medications that trigger a histamine response.
And from what I know, everyone actually has histamines, but then when we have an overload, we're not able to actually, how do I say, break it down properly. Then that's when we have the histamine intolerance happen, and the flare-ups can happen as well, right?
Right, because you have too much, because you have the histamines explode, and then we have an enzyme called diamine oxidase enzyme, DOA, and that breaks down the histamine. So when you eat it, that enzyme is in our bellies, and when we eat food that is high in histamine, that enzyme is supposed to work and chop up any of the histamines from the food, and then the rest of your digestive enzymes through your body are supposed to tone that down. But if you don't have enough of that enzyme, or you have a sick belly, the bacteria in our gut, and we have 3.3 trillion bacteria in our gut. For every one human cell, we're 10 bacteria cells. Your body weight as an adult, 3 to 4 pounds of that is gut bacteria. Anyway, so we have bacteria in our gut that, when the balance is off, produce histamines and can make the histamine issue even worse.
That's a big one, and I know a lot of people deal with that. So what are your recommendations? Do you recommend people to get tested for histamine, or they usually can tell if they have a histamine intolerance, especially if they flare up or if they have allergies to pollen, things like that?
Well, the first thing I would do is I would keep a calendar of your symptoms. I love calendar. Whether you have belly pain, you have headache, you have mood issues, keep a calendar, and don't make it complicated. Print out a white piece, from Google. You can print out June and put on your refrigerator. And when you have flares, just put an X and see what they have in common. And you're like, oh my gosh, every time I go to my son's soccer game, my skin falls off. Oh my gosh, every time I work out, I have migraines. Oh my gosh, every time that I eat gluten or I go out to restaurants is when my belly hurts. The calendar, I would say, helps like 80 to 90% of my patients figure out the issue all by themselves. So calendars where I would start to kind of get an awareness, are histamines a problem? And then I would take a look at your diet, because we can decrease the histamine load with a diet. And, high histamine foods are going to be processed foods with preservatives, food coloring, TBHQ, BHT, artificial flavors. Oftentimes gluten and dairy are high histamine foods. Red wine, kids, I'm sorry, everyone's going to click off, but red wine is a big histamine food. Kombucha and fermented foods are high histamines. Smoked cheese. So basically, your favorite charcuterie platter is like your worst nightmare if you have a histamine issue.
Oh no, I'm just seeing all the people in their minds thinking like, this is so overwhelming.
So overwhelming. Dried fruits. But just kind of having an awareness. I always tell people, there's no reason to jump in and start making drastic. Just be aware. Is this a problem for you?
Yeah, because I know people who do have high or they have either been tested that they have high histamine, and they've cut out a lot of foods, and so it's tough because almost every single food out there, or at least a lot of foods out there, are high histamine. So what do you recommend in those cases when that happens?
That I would really like for them to work with somebody like you, because I think we have become people that are isolationists. It's not even a word, but we've taught to be isolated, and now Google has made us think we're isolated. So we're like, I don't need help, I'll Google it. And we will become nutritionally deficient when we go on various diets without proper help from somebody who's trained in this. It seems like food is no big deal. Food is a huge deal, and we can create so many issues. I cannot tell you how many patients I have in practice who came because they either did a food sensitivity test or Googled their symptoms and decided to go on various diets, and their children have become so picky and so afraid of food and so nutritionally deficient because they didn't have somebody to guide them. Because when you take something away, you have to put something back. You can't just go, and then I'm not going to have any of this stuff. And yeah, in our practice, when I don't deal with adults, but I'll have some college kids, and let's say they drink red wine and they're like, well, I'm going to live life. I'm obviously going to a frat party. I'm like, okay, well, instead of the red wine, you're going to drink this drink. So you have, even in that case, we're doing continuous substitutions because we don't want to live a life of deprivation, and you're not going to be malnourished from lack of alcohol. But for other things, every time you take a food that's high in histamines, you're going to put one in that is low in histamines. And it's hard because when you're used to eating a certain way, all you know is remove. Your brain doesn't go, and now we're going to have daikon radishes, and now we're going to eat, barramundi fish from Australia. You don't know how to do that because you're not a trained nutritionist. And even if you are, you can't treat yourself because you can't treat yourself. You just can't.
Love that. Do you ever recommend people have like small exposures to the food? Because I've heard of cases where some people become anaphylactic to the food after removing it for a certain amount of time, or either they develop a sensitivity to it where they might flare more often than before when they remove the food.
Yeah, so that is a true story. And what I usually see happen is people remove the food and they do it without guidance, and they remove the food without healing the gut. And when you remove the food, the antibodies are still circulating because you haven't stomped down the inflammation. And then you bring back the food a month later or 3 months later. You haven't done anything for the gut. Now the system is still inflamed. And now the body's like, oh, I haven't seen this in a while. And now it's a massive reaction. So yes, we see that happen. However, in my practice, we do food eliminations all the time, and we heal the guts all the time. And the majority of the time, what I see is that those food sensitivities drop off, horrible food allergies get better. And, it's like coincidence. When it's not coincidence, when we work on healing the gut, that's where the food allergies and intolerance happen. So yes, it is a true thing. It can absolutely happen. I see it happening in minority of patients that we heal the gut. What I usually see is that food sensitivities and intolerance actually get better as we heal the gut.
That's awesome. And I agree with you. I've seen that happen a lot. And it's just a testament to healing the body from the inside out rather than using topicals or medications to suppress the issue.
Right. And I usually say, like, if you remove a food and you're not, so people that have nut allergy, like peanut allergy, and you're not, that's telling us your gut, you have a leaky gut, we have to work on it. If you don't do anything about it, then it's like tree nuts become an issue. Suddenly eggs are an issue. Then it's like the whole cascade, because the body is like, I'm still trying to tell you something. I'm still trying to tell you something. And they're like, oh no, you just now a food allergy person. And there's just kind of what happens. I cannot deal with that answer.
What are your thoughts on people taking a histamine blocker for breaking down histamine?
Yeah, sometimes you need to take a histamine blocker, and that's okay. But again, that this is a temporary thing until we fix the gut. Because just taking Zyrtec, which is a histamine blocker, is not the answer to your seasonal allergies. I mean, if you have like 4 days of seasonal allergies and not a big deal, you take a couple of Zyrtec, that's not what I'm saying. But people that cannot walk out of the house and they have to be on Zyrtec year round. My husband is a perfect example. He's been on Zyrtec like his entire life. And he had dermographism. So it's like when you could write your name on somebody's skin and then like he welts up. And anyway, so because he, as he calls it, he got put into tyrannical dictatorship and had to survive this household of clean eating and low gluten and low dairy without him. Basically, I volunteered for this. Anyway, so now that he's lived this life, he's like, oh my God, like I don't take Zyrtec sometimes and I don't break out in hives anymore. And I don't have the dermographism. My joints don't hurt either. I'm like, that's a miracle. It's amazing.
That's amazing. It's like you've healed your whole entire household.
Well, it's
even
like
your pet.
And but that's what I tell everybody. I was like, it's not about the one person that's suffering. Everyone has to do the plan together. And you'll be amazed when the whole family does the plan together. People that didn't even know had issues all of a sudden are like, I dropped some weight. I'm sleeping better. I didn't even realize I could sleep better. I have energy. I have dads in our eczema course all the time. They're like, I had horrible seasonal allergies. I don't have seasonal allergies anymore. I had dad that had acne on his back, and he's like, tell you something, That's gone. Thought that was just like an old guy thing, you know? So,
This is not related, but my dad, he does have a little bit of eczema, but he has like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, things like that. And then he removed like refined carbs from his diet, and his blood pressure dropped from 150 to 120 like right away.
the power of food. And
Yeah.
back to the power of food.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, okay, when people have histamine intolerance, how do you get to the root cause to solve that? If they've already removed certain foods or done the calendar, what happens after that?
Well, that's probably when you look and see, stool test. It would be very helpful. Like, what bacteria do you have? You have bacteria that is not supposed to be there, that is causing histamines. Are you taking probiotics that could make your histamine situation worse? Because not all probiotics are created equal. Just because you pay a lot of money for it doesn't mean it's a good fit. So you can be taking a probiotic. You can have a lot of dysbiosis, which means a lot of like an infection in your gut that needs to be treated. We got to look at mold. Are you live in a moldy environment? Is that why you can't get your histamines under control? Stress. Can I say enough? I don't think I can say enough. Stress is like so huge and such a trigger of histamines is, and I talk to families and they're, yeah, we do it. And then I could hear like the tension and I'm like, you've got to be into the Zen mode. That's like when you become like basically a yoga instructor.
Zen mode.
Yes, we're in Zen mode. And I'm not it. And then, you can certainly do a intestinal permeability test that tells you, are you dealing with a lot of histamines? Do you have an enzyme deficiency? And how bad is your leaky gut? Those would be the two tests. Actually three. So like stool testing, intestinal permeability, and or mold testing.
So once people get those tests done, what are the big recommendations you usually see? I know there's going to be so many because it depends on each person, but let's say like from a high level summary, just for people who are listening and struggling with it, what can they usually do after they get those tests done?
Sure. Well, if you have mold, you have to remove the mold or you have to move and go somewhere else because the mold is not your friend. Or if you can't move, you get an air doctor. And it is like truly the best air filter to get you even if you live in a moldy environment, it makes a huge difference. Then if you have mold, then you have to go through detox. If you have high histamines, you're going to have to go on a low histamine diet. And if you have a deficiency in enzymes, you're going to have to take the DOA enzyme. If you have leaky gut, you have to remove the foods that keep irritating the gut, and you have to do specific minerals, D, zinc, omegas, sometimes C. You got to do specific probiotics, digestive enzymes, herbals to help balance. So if you have dysbiosis, so when you do your stool test, you have a lot of critters that are not supposed to be there. We got to get rid of them. We're using herbals. If you have a lot of yeast overgrowth, which could be a big problem for eczema, got to get that under control with antifungal herbals. There's antifungal medications and the specific probiotics that prevent it from coming back.
I love that. You just somehow put everything in such a high level summary with years of what you do into like a condensed few sentences. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. And then ta-da, and then you're good. Then you're
Yeah, I wish it was that easy too. Awesome. I think you've shared so much great information about where people can get started, how they can get started, because there's so much to it. And I really love that the way you teach and the analogies that you give are so good, so succinct and easy to understand. So thank you for that.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. I try to put out as much information as I can. Obviously, I just can't do free consults for everybody, which could, but that's why, we're doing these podcasts, and on Instagram, I try to put out as much content on our blog, my YouTube channel, trying to put as much out there as I can when not in clinic or on my online courses.
So for babies who go through this, if they have histamine intolerance, what do you usually do in that case?
Yeah, I have several in my online eczema course, and the mamas and the babies are nursed. And so, of course, the mamas have to go on the diet that helps the baby. And the moms going on the elimination diet actually makes a huge difference in the babies. And then when the babies begin solid food introduction, we begin with low histamine foods, and then we're generally able to stay out of trouble.
That's great. I love that. And yeah, I've heard a lot of parents who do go on elimination diets, and it does help the kids as well.
It does, but my mamas need to be able to do an elimination diet, even with food replacements, because as a mom, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're the nursing, so we're the food for the baby. We have to wipe the baby's butt. Now we got to make sure the baby's sleeping. We have to be sleeping. We have to wipe our own butt. We have to make sure we're eating. So it's like, it's so much extra. So I'm always getting really worried about my nursing mamas, because like, there's too much pressure. Please get the help of a nutritionist to help you in this journey, because you can't do it. It's not make you a lesser woman or a lesser mama. It's just too much, and there's too much at stake.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And everything you said, it's yeah, bang on. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
I have had one client where his doctor was able to get him a histamine intolerance test, but that's so rare. And I guess that doesn't happen, right?
It doesn't. You have to work with a functional medicine doctor.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I always tell my client how lucky he is because he gets it for free.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, Dr. Anna Maria Temple, any last words or encouragements that you want to give people who are listening who might be dealing with this?
Eczema is so hard. It's so stressful especially when it's happening to our children, because we will take any pain for ourselves, but when it's happening to our babies, it is gut wrenching. So just know that there is hope, and that there's help, and that if whatever you're doing is not working, you've got to try something else. It doesn't mean that your child is the case that no one has heard of, because when we're in our suffering, we feel like we're the only one. And the folks that are in my online eczema course, and I'm sure the folks that you work with, they're like, but you don't understand. Have you ever seen this? And you're like, well, actually, unfortunately, yes, I see this all the time. But when you're the person suffering, you feel like you're the only one. You're the only one that's not eating processed foods. You've given up sugar. You've read about vitamin D, and you've read about not putting creams and lotions on your child. You've done all this, and your child is still suffering. Therefore, you need to find another plan. Doesn't mean that's the end of the road. It just means that there's something else you're not thinking of, because most of us are not trained in this. Like, we spend years, right? How many years do we spend learning about it? So please just know that there's hope. And if what you're doing is not working, try something else, and don't rely on medications as the first step.
Thank you for sharing that. I think everything you shared is so important, and you gave a lot of wise words. Also, what is your baby and kid eczema course for people who are listening, who might have kids and are interested?
Yeah, so in our online course, you can do it. You could either do modules where you do it yourself, and it's a 7-step program where you go from the learning about the foods that can hurt you, the foods that can heal you, basic supplements you should be taking, gut healing supplements, and then healing, and then of course food reintroduction. And all that is done you can do it all by yourself, or you can hang out with us in our Facebook group, where, oh my gosh, it is my favorite, because the mamas jump in there, and the mamas who have babies that have healed help the mamas who are beginning their journey, and everyone is answering the food questions because we're all speaking the same language. And anyway, it is a place where you can find hope and healing with a stepwise plan that will guide you in the right direction. Because it's not necessarily, I have people like, and I've done that and I've done this. I'm like, great, but did you do it in the right order? Because it's not just about, it's kind of like a Lego set. Yeah, I have all the pieces. And if you just put them, one on top of the other, well, you don't make the dinosaur. But if you follow a stepwise regimen, all of a sudden you have a dinosaur. So just because you have all the pieces doesn't mean that you have the plan. So that's what we offer. We offer a plan and hope for healing.
That's great. I love that. And, you guys are doing something really, really wonderful. And I appreciate everything that you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. And I'm always so grateful to be on this journey together, because I feel I learned so much from you and what you have to share. And it helps me be a better doctor because of all the information that you put out there.
Oh, thank you so much. And Dr. Anna Maria Temple, where can people find you, or even do a consult with you if they're interested?
Sure. You go right to my website, dranamaria.com, where it'll take you to courses and Instagram and to our consults. And you can pop over to Instagram, DRANA Maria Temple. We'd love to see you there. Great posts coming your way this weekend, of course, from Memorial Day. But yeah, we'd love to see you on any of our platforms.
Awesome. And that's how I found you too on Instagram.
That's how we met.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And don't forget, if you ever want to hear any other great topics from Dr. Anna Maria Temple, just let me know. And we can always welcome her back on the show if she wants to share more about her baby eczema course or any of the other topics to do with eczema that she deals with all the time. So thank you so much, Dr. Anna Maria.
Thank you so much, Abby. So great to see you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.